Mr. Beacon podcast is sponsored by Wiliot, scaling IoT with battery-free Bluetooth.
Okay, so Dominic Gunnard, thanks so much for returning to the Mr. Beacon podcast. Last time we were talking about your book and about everything, but as well as being the CTO of everything, you are the co-chair of the GS1 Digital Link Standard Working Group. I guess the standard's been out for what, how long? Since last year, is it?
Since August 2018, yeah.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your suggesting we talk about it, and I think it's a great idea. It's not specific to Bluetooth beacon technology, but it definitely has a relevance. Tell us why people should care about this GS1 Digital Link Standard.
So I'll start to tell you why they should care overall, and then maybe why I think it's relevant also to the Bluetooth world, right?
Yeah.
So starting with overall, what is it trying to do? It's basically trying to put an end to proprietary encodings to put web addresses or all kinds of identifiers on products. So it's an attempt to standardize the way you describe a product on the web and the way you describe a product on the tags, so that consumers can directly interact with these products through a standard that gives each product a unique identity. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting because for instance, in the marketing world, each new campaign on a set of product requires basically a new tag, right? And you have a proliferation of different tags. You have one for a marketing campaign, you might have one for compliance reasons, and you might have one for supply chain, reading the product in supply chain. That means much more real estate on the product. It means also a lot of confusion, as in which tag should you use in which context. So there was a thinking that actually we could we could merge them all into a web address that would be unique to the product, and this is what the Digital Link Standard is about. Now, in the beacon space, it's also quite relevant because beacons can advertise URLs, and these URLs can be related to products, and there is no standard way of relating a URL to a product. Once there is this standard way, and this is what the GS1 Digital Link basically offers, then it opens a whole range of possibilities, especially in terms of use cases across different domains, across supply chain, consumer engagement, etc., etc.
Very good. Yeah, you gave an example of all these different applications that could be unified with a single tag rather than having one for each, and one of them was compliance. Can you explain what you mean by compliance in this context?
So there are a number of new laws and new regulations, being in the US or in Europe, also in China, around, for instance, around CPG products. So I mean, to give you an example, in pharma, for instance, there is a big trend and certain regulations in Europe whereby all the packs of drugs need to be serialized. So that's one example that will require a particular tag. To give you another example, in the CPG world, there is much more pressure lately in the US, but also in Europe, to have very clear nutritional facts that are also accessible on the web in the digital world, as most people now check their products in the digital world. That also requires a special kind of tag. Right now, there's a standard by GMA called Smart Label, which explains how you should basically represent the nutritional facts of a CPG product on the web. Mm-hmm. But there's nothing that tells you what the tag should be like, right? So you end up having different tags for each of these different compliance stories. And then you have more tags for supply chain, and even more tags when you want to do things like consumer engagement and marketing campaigns.
So tell us a bit about the nuts and bolts of what this URL is that is describing a product. Is all of the information encoded in an extremely long URL, or what? How does it work?
Well, so how we started is basically we looked at what's out there in terms of identifying products, and the most well-known way of identifying a product is this one. That's the 1D barcode, right?
Mm-hmm.
It takes different forms in Europe and in the US, but it's essentially what we call a GTIN, right? A global identification number for a product. This has a number of limitations. First of all, it identifies the class of product. So it identifies, this type of product, but not the one I have in my hands, right? The second problem is that it's a code that machines in the supply chain understand, but we as consumers cannot do anything with that code, right? Our phones don't understand that code. That code is not queryable on the web. So we can't really start an interaction with it.
And for those that are listening to this podcast as opposed to watching, so you just basically took a label from a Coca-Cola bottle. It's got a 1D barcode and it's got a bunch of numbers on, so which mean absolutely nothing. That barcode, how does that relate to GS1? I'm going to take us off a bit of a tangent, but this is a GS1 standard. I was in Australia. I saw a big building with GS1 on it. I hear about this thing, but who are GS1 and how does the digital link standard fit with all the other things that GS1 does?
So GS1 is basically a set of member organizations. They have a member organization in many countries. I think it's the international organizations with the most countries represented in the world, actually, even more than the UN or other big organizations. And it's the organization of commerce, the organization of global commerce, right? These different countries came together to set standards on how to do global commerce, right? How to identify products, how to, have standardized ways of expressing the data and the identifiers. And so essentially what GS1 delivers at its core are these numbers, right? These numbers for the products. They manage the company part of these numbers as well as the product part of these numbers. And they issue these numbers. So if you're a brand and you create a new product, you purchase a set of numbers from a member organization where you're operating. So you would, for instance, buy it in the US. Right now I'm in Switzerland. I would buy it in Switzerland. But so far, GS1 is actually massive, right? I think you have around 5 billion scans of GS1 identifier a day. And most big companies out there, even small ones, have GS1 identifiers. Whenever you push a product in the real world, you need to have GS1 identifiers. The problem is they were not really linked to the web, right? They existed in this parallel world, the world of supply chain, the world of business, but they were not really linked back to the world of consumers and to the web, right? The proof is that probably you and I, before we started to look deeper at GS1, we didn't know anything about these codes. We just see them, but we don't know anything about them.
And they manifest themselves as barcodes and also on RFID, right?
Yes, yeah, barcodes, RFID as well. Yeah, that's usually how you see them, and you can see them in different forms of barcodes, 1D barcodes, but also 2D barcodes like data matrix, QR codes, and different other forms, actually. Yeah.
Okay. And then so say a bit more about this GTIN thing. So this is a number that you look at it and you can't really understand what it is. It describes categories of products, but does it actually define so could I read that GTIN number and know, oh, this is a certain kind of Coca-Cola. It's a 12-ounce bottle or whatever. What does that number tell you?
Yeah, I mean, as a human, probably not, unless you know all the GTINs by heart. Hopefully not. But obviously, a machine would be able to extract that. So these numbers are very well structured. They start with a country code, followed by a company prefix, and then followed by a number that expresses the product identification. So yes, you would be able to know which country it comes from. You would be able to know which company it comes from, and eventually you would be able to know what's the product. But again, usually at what we call the SKU, so at the generic product level, not at the instance level. There are some GS1 standards that also address the instance level. Those are the RFID standards, EPC standard, electronic product code. That's then a serialization of a product. So you also have a serial number for the product you actually have in your hands.
Okay, and so this digital link standard encompasses both of those realms. It actually identifies a specific product, does it?
Yeah. So the digital link doesn't need to identify a specific product, but I believe in a number of exciting use cases it will need to. But it also supports identifying a range of products. What the digital link brings to the table is it moves these GTINs from the world of supply chain to the web. Basically transforms these numbers into URLs. Now that seems like a small thing. It's actually not huge. If you look at the standard, I'm not saying it was easy to write it, but it was one of the fastest standard in terms of from the beginning to the rectification at GS1. So it's a simple concept. Just turn these numbers into URLs. But it is extremely powerful when you think about it, because it means now you can encode them in a QR code. And guess what? Millions of phones out there can read QR codes natively, as you might know. iOS phones, for instance, with the camera app, you can directly point it at the QR code. It will decode the URL. So just by turning it into a URL, now all iPhones can interact with it. If we relate it back to the beacon world, beacons can broadcast URLs. Well, they can't broadcast GTINs because no one would know what to do with that. But when they broadcast a URL, you can go to that URL and then you can retrieve content that's related to a product. So that makes this standard much more accessible, and it also allows merging the two worlds of the supply chain and the world of consumer engagement into one single tag.
And let's go back to what's actually in this URL. It's a hierarchy which describes things. Is all the information in the URL, or is it up in some server somewhere? So
you can choose what you want to put in the URL. So typically the URL would contain a GTIN, and sometimes it would contain a serial number, and it can also contain more extensions. All these extensions are standardized in the GS1 world. So for instance, it could contain a sell-by date, or it could contain a size of the product or weight of the product, all of the standardized fields that are supported by GS1. So you can make it as complete as you want. The problem is going to be one of size, right? Because the URL grows as you add more and more data. And that might be a problem when you print the QR code in a small surface. It might also be a problem, for instance, when you broadcast the URL from a beacon. This is why also we're working on a second part of the standard, which will be about compression, so that we can compress these URLs. They will still be valid URLs, but they will be compressed in using an algorithm that can do offline decompression, so that you can basically have more efficient ways of encoding these URLs.
So it will, at the moment, you would probably end up with a URL which is too big to go into a Bluetooth beacon advertising packet, I'm guessing, with today's version of the standard.
Potentially, yes. I mean, I don't know by heart how big you can go in terms of advertising packets. Maybe you know.
So of the order of 37 bytes. So presumably what you can do is today you could take that and just put it through a URL compressor, and then you kind of hopefully get to what you would need to turn that into something that would be accessible.
Yeah, I think with 37 bytes going beyond the GTIN would be hard indeed. Taking an off-the-shelf existing URL compression is is an option, but is a bit sad because you lose the opportunity of decoding what's in there, right? Which is why the standard itself is now evolving into also a compression standard, and that's going to be very powerful.
Okay, so I have one of these URLs. It's encoded in this 2D barcode, a QR code. I scan it on my phone, and I go to, what's the website that I go to when I do this? Who's hosting it?
So basically anyone can host it, and there is part of the specification that's called the resolver specification. There was a tiny part of that specification in the first ratified standard, but in the second version this is described in more details, how you basically serve the content, the protocol to serve the content at the back of one of these digital links. Mm-hmm. But basically anyone can install a resolver. It could be a brand, it could be GS1 themselves, one of the member organizations, or it could be a service provider. It could be pretty much anyone running one of these servers.
Okay. And you're co-chair of this group. What are the other, who are your fellow chair, or what are the organizations that have led this, and who's, I mean, you don't need to give me an exhausted list, but what sort of companies have been working on this standard?
So the standard really generated a lot of traction, and the size of the working group doubled, or even more than this in the second phase. So it really generated a lot of traction, and I think everyone in the industry is pretty well represented. So from very big retailers to very big brands, to solution providers, printers, tag manufacturers. So it's a pretty big group, and I think all parties are represented.
But I thought I remembered seeing that Walmart were one of you were working with someone from Walmart on the standard.
One of the co-chair was Walmart, indeed.
Not to pick them out but it just kind of gives you a sense of the level of gravity and so forth. So why does your company, Everything, care about this? What were you doing before the standard existed, and how does this change what you do?
So basically what we were doing was exactly that, except in a proprietary manner, right? And we've been talking to GS1 for a while about bringing their identifiers to the web. As a matter of fact, when I was a researcher at the Auto ID labs at MIT and ETH, the Auto ID labs are the labs co-financed by GS1, the research labs. We were already talking about that back then. It took a while to really become a reality. But through companies like Everything and others that were putting proprietary encodings on codes all the time, it became clear for GS1 that this was a missed opportunity. And we contacted them about creating a standard, and then we were like, you know what, we're actually forming a group. Do you want to co-chair it? And then everything accelerated, and within 6 months we had the first draft of the standard, which is very, very exciting.
And how are things going in terms of adoption? Who's using it now?
Adoption has started now. Obviously, one of these global business standards takes a while for mass scale adoption. The 1D barcode took many years before it became what it's today, and before it became so ubiquitous. But it has started. The first products that actually feature digital links are hitting the market. For instance, we're working with a salmon company, Norwegian salmon company called Movi. Beginning of this week, they launched the first salmons that are actually featuring a digital link. And this digital link is used for quite an interesting user experience. You can scan it, and you know exactly where the salmon comes from. You can exactly follow the life of the salmon. and know where the good is coming from. Now, that's the consumer experience, but it is also compatible in the supply chain. So this code can also be scanned in the supply chain for basically routing the salmon through the supply chain. So that would be one example. We're also working with apparel brands in that space, at everything. Apparel brands that will put digital links on their apparel items. Also in pharma, there are now pilot programs running on the digital link, and several retailers that started adopting it as well.
Excellent. Very good. Well, is there anything else we've missed out? Anything else we should cover in terms of introducing people to what you guys have been working on?
No, I think that's a good summary. You know, it's a small change, but it actually could spark a revolution in terms of identifying products and in terms of consumers being able to interact with products.
And if I'm a brand, or if I'm building systems for brands, how do I get involved? How do I kind of go to the next level in terms of learning about this and adopting the standard?
So you can join the working group. Basically, any GS1 member can join the working group, and that's most brands out there.
Mm-hmm.
Even non-GS1 members can join. Mm-hmm. You can download the standard, which is available on the GS1 website. And you can get started. It's actually fairly easy to get started in terms of how to encode your existing GTNs into a digital link. Then if you want to implement a resolver, you can also follow the specifications, or you can work with service providers such as Everything to basically use the resolver implemented by these companies for your products. So it's actually fairly straightforward. It's a very straightforward process to deploy the digital link.
Wonderful. Well, Dominic, thanks very much for coming back on the podcast. This was really useful.
Thanks for inviting me.